In the first year in this world, he added just a single point to his strength, yet it was enough to shatter corpses with one punch. By the second year, he added more. His body became so resilient that blades could no longer harm him, and he could even crush a kitchen knife into an iron ball with his bare hands. With these skills, he secured a job as a constable in town, finally earning a steady living. In the third year, the Great Qin went to war with the Northern D. Fortunately for him, he had no family ties. The local government feared that someone with nothing to lose might be unstable, fearing he would flee or rebel, so they didn't conscript him. But unfortunately, his chief constable was drafted. Before leaving, the chief, with bloodshot eyes, entrusted his 10-year-old daughter, Xu Qingran, to his care. That departure turned out to be a final farewell. By the fourth year, possessing 4 points of strength, he was nearly invincible in the town of Fansu. When bandits raided the town, he stood alone with his blade, cutting down over 20 men before they even realized what was happening. The old mayor began to see him as a successor, and the townsfolk revered him as a guardian deity. The only lingering concern was a bandit he had killed named Yi Yu. Yi Yu's brother, Yi Feng, had struck gold 2 years prior and joined an immortal sect. It was said that cultivators never let a grudge last overnight. Luckily, the brother had only just started his training and wouldn't be able to descend the mountain for 20 years. After a quick calculation, he breathed a sigh of relief. After all, in 20 years, it wasn't certain who would be the hunter and who would be the prey. By the 11th year, 10 points of strength allowed his punches to create vacuums. Feeling that his strength was reaching a strange plateau, he tried adding a point to his luck. Consequently, that year, he found money just by walking down the street. He could even catch fish with an empty hook, as if he were the chosen child of destiny itself. In the 13th year, 2 pieces of news arrived at once. The bad news was the grim report from the front. Xu Qingran's father had died in battle. The young girl wept inconsolably. The good news, however, was that masters from the Xianxiao sect had descended to recruit disciples, claiming a person of great destiny resided here. He initially assumed that person was him, but the test revealed the true, chosen one was actually Xu Qingran. She was unwilling to leave, however, because she had long ago discovered his secret of eternal youth. To ensure that she could stay by his side forever one day, she finally agreed to become a disciple. Her only condition was to bring him along. However, reality was quite harsh. The immortal master examined his physical foundation and gave a forward verdict. No luck, mundane bones. Taking him back to the sect would only make him a burden, so he was rejected at the gates. As compensation, the master allowed him to choose one item. He didn't ask for divine weapons, but instead asked if there was a technique to trade one's lifespan for cultivation. The master looked at him as if he were a fool, but tossed him a manual anyway. He was handed a turtle breathing technique and 2 foundation pills. The manual claimed 300 years to form a core, 3,000 to become a powerhouse, and 30,000 to reach transcendence. At 300,000 years, one would be invincible. Better yet, it allowed him to burn 3 times his lifespan for triple the cultivation speed. It was, quite literally, tailor-made for him. What took others 3 centuries would take him only 1. Time flew, and another 10 years passed. The old mayor retired, and he naturally became the new mayor. By now, his status panel had become quite magnificent. Strength at 20 points, and luck at 6. With a simple flick of a leaf, he could pierce solid rock 50 meters away. Under the influence of his high luck, the turtle breathing technique even evolved into the great turtle breathing technique. His reputation began to spread, and countless wanderers of the martial world came seeking him out. There were orphans from destroyed clans, geniuses whose engagements were broken, and outcasts with severed meridians. Each one, to be honest, looked exactly like a classic protagonist. They knelt at his door, begging to be his disciples, but he refused them all. What a joke, taking in people who carry karmic burdens and hatred auras would be enough to cause trouble for a lifetime. These people refused to leave, however, and simply settled in the town. The peaceful Gontang town was forcibly transformed by them into a miniature martial world. One day, someone decided to test his strength. They intentionally arranged a gang fight on his territory. He sat there holding his tea, not even bothering to stand up, and simply dipped a finger into the water. He flicked a single drop, and it shot out like a cannonball, sending the provocateur flying dozens of meters and crashing halfway down the street. The crowd was paralyzed with shock as the crisis vanished. Soon after, the mastermind behind the scheme appeared to apologize. It was actually someone from the Great Qin Martial Bureau, wanting him to leave his seclusion and save the country. He only asked one thing. Were there no other immortals in Great Qin? After all, he still remembered when he first arrived in this world. He had seen an immortal descend from the sky and level a city with a single palm. It was precisely because of that terrifying power that he had decided to stay hidden and develop in peace. Why, then, was there suddenly no one else to call upon? There was one other, he was told, but that person had long since entered a death seclusion and ignored worldly affairs. Now, the only person they could rely on was him. From their conversation, we learned that this world is actually just a lower realm, while the true cultivation world exists in the spirit realm. If cultivators from there force their way down, they are suppressed by the heavenly Tao, so they rarely descend. He realized the truth then, feeling a bit of relief. It seemed this world didn't have many threats after all. He knew that as long as he stayed hidden for tens of thousands of years, he would be invincible. As for leaving his seclusion now, he decided to make a run for it. He vanished into thin air, leaving the world behind. Fighting in a war was a different price entirely, and far too dangerous. He was absolutely not going. A few days later, several desiccated corpses appeared in town without explanation. A similar incident had occurred decades ago, and we remember how it was handled then. Back then, Taoist Yun had dealt with the matter. However, this time, Yun never arrived to help. Instead, what finally came was his cold body and a suicide note. The letter explained that the killer was a giant serpent in the deep mountains, nearly transformed into a dragon, who cultivated by consuming the essence of humans. He looked at the letter and turned to the gathered townspeople, asking them a simple question. It was a moment of quiet reflection for everyone present. "Have you ever heard the story of the old man who moves mountains?" he asked. The crowd could only stare back in confusion. Well, that old man was him. That night, he entered the mountains alone to face a peak shaped like a serpent's tail. With 25 points of strength, he slowly raised his right fist. With a deafening roar, the earth shattered and the entire mountain was reduced to rubble by a single punch. Talk about an overreaction. Amidst the chaos, a giant serpent dozens of meters long lay dying. The creature let out a final, furious roar of indignation at its fate. It claimed it was only 100 souls away from becoming a dragon and cursed him for destroying its path. "Aren't you afraid of divine retribution?" it hissed. He simply apologized, noting that since he wasn't from this world, he wasn't sure if the local heavenly Tao even had jurisdiction over him. A fair point, really. With another punch, he killed the demon snake on the spot. To his surprise, under the influence of his luck, he extracted a wisp of dragon chi from the body. This granted him a new method for long-range combat. At this moment, he estimated his combat power was nearing the 8th or 9th level of Foundation establishment. The next day, the townspeople discovered the mountain had vanished into thin air. Naturally, they began to suspect he was the one responsible for the miracle. They gave him a new title, Half-Step Invincible. Why only a half-step? Well, the logic of the townspeople was quite specific, as it turns out. It was because no one had seen him fight a true immortal yet. Regardless, Gantang Town soon welcomed a massive influx of martial artists who admired him. Because of these wanderers, Gantang Town was officially renamed the Miniature Martial World. But all of this, he felt, had very little to do with him. It seemed staying low profile was becoming impossible. Another few decades of secluded cultivation passed while the world outside continued to change rapidly. The winds of the Great Qin Empire shifted as a new emperor ascended the throne. And here, our story enters a much more turbulent era. The empire's defenses were crumbling, and our miniature martial world was about to face a true crisis. It all began with a man who had left 30 years ago. Yifeng had returned. As the saying goes, 30 years can change everything, and the boy who once left in defeat was now a formidable immortal disciple. He had come back for one reason: revenge for his brother's death. After using his overwhelming power to intimidate the 4 great sect masters of the town, he learned of a mysterious figure, Yu, who could shatter mountains and part rivers like a true immortal. To him, this sounded like a personal challenge. Yifeng immediately concluded that you were the one who killed his brother. As for your legendary strength, he wasn't the least bit concerned. He believed he was just as capable of destroying mountains. Consequently, the 4 sect masters were forced to go to your home and wake you from your slumber. And so, we see the stage being set for your first real battle against a true cultivator since you began your long seclusion. However, upon hearing the news, he didn't panic at all. If a guest insists on visiting, one might as well exchange a few blows first. If the guest can't be killed, there's always time to kick them out later. After decades in this world, his strength points had finally reached 35. His power was now far beyond that of an ordinary cultivator. Facing Yifeng, who hovered arrogantly in midair, he remained perfectly calm. Yifeng looked down from above and demanded to know if he was the one who had killed his useless brother. It was a charming family dynamic, clearly. He declared that by killing everyone in town, his quest for vengeance would be even more justified. He viewed them all as mere ants. Yifeng didn't feel like wasting any more words. He raised his hand and unleashed a flying sword, initiating the battle with a cold strike. As the crowd watched in absolute terror, he did something quite unexpected. He simply reached out with 2 fingers. With effortless grace, he caught the flying sword between his fingertips. It was a move that made the immortal weapon look like a common toy. Then, with a casual flick of his finger, a terrifying counterforce sent Yifeng flying back hundreds of meters. So, this was a cultivator? He felt a bit disappointed, to be honest. His remark drove Yifeng into a murderous rage, prompting him to summon his life-bound treasure. A cloud of swords filled the sky, swirling with the intent to shred him into nothingness. It was a grand display, if nothing else. With a casual wave of his hand, a golden dragon chi roared forth, instantly shattering the sky full of swords into useless fragments. It was time to show this visitor what true cultivation actually looked like. And as we shall see, the lesson was going to be quite painful. He flicked his fingers through the air, creating shockwaves that shattered the earth and sent a terrifying blast of energy forward, instantly turning Yifeng into dust. The destruction was absolute, leaving nothing behind but a lingering silence for those who had witnessed such overwhelming power. After seeing an immortal killed in a single second, every martial artist present felt a chill run down their spine, standing frozen and not even daring to breathe. He looked calmly toward the crowd and asked how much they truly knew about the immortal sect Yifeng belonged to. They explained that Yifeng was a disciple of the Xuan'a sect, located 80 miles away, and had committed many atrocities even before joining them. Despite his crimes, the sect had still accepted him. Their leader was the only resident cultivator in the Chun realm, though he had reportedly been in seclusion for a century. He hoped the old man had truly ascended for his sake. To be honest, dealing with another one of those types sounded rather tedious. Any sect that produced a man like Yifeng certainly wasn't a force for good. Soon after, he attempted to return to his quiet life. The four great masters offered to renovate his dilapidated old house, but he refused. 80 years had passed, and while his friends were gone, this house remained. The old building still held the traces of the past, and he felt it was necessary to keep something from those days. Not long after, an official from the town arrived. The man who had once been full of youthful energy was now old and gray-haired. Seeing him, he couldn't help but sigh at the passage of time. He asked if the war was still going on after all this time. The previous emperor had passed, the young heir had taken the throne, and the court was in chaos. The first line of defense had fallen, and they were relying entirely on the eldest princess, who had studied military strategy to hold the line. She had gone to the battlefield personally just to barely hold the second defense. The official pleaded, saying the empire had no generals left to use. The immortal sects couldn't be relied upon, and now, he believed only our protagonist could save the great Qing Empire. He wondered if the empire was truly so depleted of talent that they had to send a woman to lead the army. It was a grim situation indeed. He was about to refuse when he paused. The old man, seeing his indifferent expression, thought he was still unwilling and spoke with desperation. The eldest princess might be a woman, but she had the spirit of the founding emperor. She feared that if the empire fell, the people would become mere livestock. The official reminded him that he also came from the common world. He asked how he could bear to watch the people suffer such a fate. He questioned if all the generals of the empire had truly died out, leaving only a woman to face the end alone. The official insisted that leaving a woman to face such a burden alone was truly disgraceful, and that if he intervened, the war would surely end. He told the man to stop with the flattery. He simply asked for the location of the battlefield. As he donned his bamboo hat, the old official, Duan, bowed deeply and refused to leave until he had an answer. When he heard the front line was 3,000 miles away, he told the official to head back home. Before the words had even finished echoing, the old man felt a sudden, violent gust of wind strike his face, forcing his eyes shut. When he finally managed to open them again, the room was entirely empty. There was no sign of our protagonist anywhere. Only 2 footprints, pressed half an inch deep into the solid bluestone floor, remained as proof he had ever been there. 3,000 miles away, we find a battlefield drenched in the color of a blood-red sunset. This final barrier of the great Qing Empire was now on the verge of collapse. The city walls were covered in fallen soldiers. Beneath a tattered dragon flag, the eldest princess, Lu Rian, stood alone in her silver armor. Her armor was stained a dark crimson, and she leaned heavily on a broken sword, gasping for breath. She was, quite literally, the last stand for the dignity of the imperial family. Outside the gates, a black cloud of tens of thousands of northern enemy troops loomed, yet they did not attack. They were waiting for the figure hovering in midair. An old man in blood-red robes stood atop a massive artifact made of white bone. In his hand, he gripped a myriad soul banner, a truly grim weapon of war. Countless restless spirits wailed within the banner. He gave a sinister laugh, identifying himself as an elder of the Qiyu sect while looking down at the princess. He noted she possessed some spiritual talent and offered to spare a sliver of the imperial bloodline if she would submissively become his disciple. Otherwise, he threatened to slaughter the city and refine their souls. Lu Rian spat back that the empire had princesses who died in battle, but none who surrendered. The elder in the blood-red robes snorted coldly, unimpressed by her defiance. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he swung the myriad soul banner forward. In an instant, a howling gale of Een energy erupted, and the black spirits coalesced into a giant, spectral palm that slammed down toward the city walls. This technique, the Netherworld Crest, carried the full power of a late-stage Foundation establishment cultivator. Against such force, a mortal army would simply dissolve into mist. Lu Rian closed her eyes in utter despair. She had never imagined that, just one step away from holding the gate, a cultivator would personally interfere in a mortal war. It seemed the great Qing Empire was finally destined to fall. To be honest, there was nothing left for a mortal woman to do against such magic. But just as everything seemed lost, a sudden, piercing sound of something breaking the sound barrier echoed from high above the clouds. Everyone instinctively looked up to see a streak of azure light, falling like a meteor and gaining speed as it tore through the sky toward the earth. The light slammed violently into that massive spectral palm hovering in midair. There were no flashy spells involved, only pure, brutal, unbridled kinetic energy. That netherworld crest, which was capable of slaughtering an entire city the moment it touched the azure light. shattered like tofu hitting a sledgehammer, exploding into a sky full of black mist. Without slowing down, the light continued its straight path, crashing into the open ground right before the city walls. The earth trembled violently, as if a massive earthquake had struck, and the shockwave sent tens of thousands of northern cavalrymen and their horses flying into the air. For a moment, the entire battlefield went silent. Whether it was the fallen Northern army or the defenders on the wall, everyone watched the center of the dust cloud in stunned silence as the haze slowly cleared. At the center of a massive crater, our protagonist slowly stood up, brushed the dust off his long robe, and straightened the bamboo hat on his head. He muttered to himself that the journey was a bit long, and he hadn't quite managed to control the force of his landing. He then looked up and asked if she was the one in charge here. Lu Rian stood there, completely dazed, and after a long silence, she stammered, asking which immortal mountain this immortal master had come from. He replied that he was no immortal. He turned his back to the city wall and looked up at the sky toward the blood-robed old man, who was also looking a bit shaken. He explained he was just a town mayor who heard there was some trouble here and came to mediate. The elder in the air swept his divine sense over the man's body, finding absolutely no fluctuations of spiritual power. He was baffled, realizing that the man before him was a mere mortal. He wondered if he was just a martial artist who had practiced some external physical techniques. Although he didn't understand how his spectral claw had shattered, a cultivator's contempt for mortals was already etched into his bones. The elder suddenly flew into a rage. He pinched a spell gesture and summoned a crimson flying sword, which transformed into a streak of blood-red light aimed straight for the man's forehead. Lu Rian cried out in alarm, warning the immortal to be careful, but he stood his ground, not moving an inch. At the very moment the flying sword was about to pierce his brow, he raised his right hand and flicked a finger. That blade, a low-grade spiritual tool capable of cutting iron like clay, was sent flying by a single finger. Not only that, but the massive recoil. The force was so immense that the sword's surface instantly spiderwebbed with cracks, and with a sharp snap, it shattered into countless fragments. Since his life-bound treasure was damaged, the blood-robed elder in the air coughed up a mouthful of blood, his eyes filled with pure terror. He gasped that this was impossible. He demanded to know what kind of physical body our protagonist possessed, as even the strongest body cultivators couldn't shatter spiritual tools with their bare hands. Our hero simply remarked that spiritual energy is far too fragile. Then, we see him slightly bend his knees, preparing for something quite dramatic. The ground beneath him instantly collapsed, leaving only an afterimage behind. In the next heartbeat, he had already appeared 100 meters up in the air, right in front of the blood-robed elder. This wasn't flight, you see. It was a pure, raw jump. The elder's pupils shrunk in horror. He only had time to throw up a spiritual shield, begging for mercy and claiming he was from the Chiyu sect. Meanwhile, with an expressionless face, our protagonist threw a single punch. There were no flashy signs, only absolute, overwhelming power as the pressure of his fist compressed the air itself. This formed an air cannon that slammed heavily into the spiritual shield. The barrier shattered like wet paper, and the momentum of the fist tore through the elder's chest without any resistance, even blasting a vacuum cloud trail over 1,000 meters long behind him. The elder stared down at the massive hole in his chest with wide eyes. Until the very moment of his death, he never understood what kind of power had hit him. Afterward, pulled by gravity, our hero entered a free fall and landed steadily on the city wall, right in front of Lu Rian. When the Northern Army saw their godlike protector killed by a single punch, their entire formation instantly collapsed into absolute chaos. Generals and soldiers alike threw away their armor and fled in a pathetic panic. On the walls of Daqing City, however, there was only a deathly silence. Every soldier watched him with a mixture of awe and terror. He ignored the crowd, focusing only on the woman before him who, despite the blood on her face, was still clearly the elegant Princess Royal. Lu Rian took a deep breath and, with a trembling voice, gave him a deep, respectful bow. She asked for the gentleman's honorable name, promising that she would use the entire strength of her kingdom to repay him. He simply waved his hand, telling her that repayment wasn't necessary. He explained that he had only come here to ask about a certain matter. She urged him to ask, promising to tell him everything she knew without reservation. He then pointed toward the corpse of the blood-robed elder on the ground and noted that the fellow claimed to be from the Chiyu sect. He wanted to know where that was located. She explained that the Chiyu sect is located in the hidden Een mountains of the northern spirit realm. She wondered if he feared they might seek revenge. Between the spirit realm and this mortal world, there are strict rules. Any cultivator who forces their way down risks being struck down by heavenly laws. There are ways around it, of course, but their strength would be severely diminished. She asked again if he was worried about the sect's retaliation. Our hero nodded, feeling a bit relieved that the place was so far away. He admitted that if you kill the young ones, the old ones usually come looking for trouble. And as a simple man, he truly hated unnecessary trouble. He then told her that if there was nothing else, they should part ways forever. Since he lacked a spiritual root, ordinary cultivators couldn't sense his true depth anyway. Just as he turned to leave, however, Lu Ruyan hurriedly called out to him. She noted that the throne of Daqing was currently vacant and asked if he had any interest in ruling. He simply waved his hand and lowered his straw hat. He reminded her that he was just a mayor and told her not to mention today's events to anyone. With that, he took a single step and vanished into the vast darkness of the night. We see him return to Gantang town shortly after. He went back to his quiet life as if nothing had happened. By the 85th year of his journey, a new milestone was reached. His strength attribute had reached 40 points. However, he discovered that simply increasing strength was hitting a bottleneck as his physical body was beginning to struggle with containing such immense power. To be honest, he needed more durability, so he decided to focus on constitution next. By the 90th year, Lu Rian had become the empress of the Daqing Restoration, bringing peace to the four directions. Deep within the palace, she erected a wordless monument, visiting it faithfully twice a month. Only a very few people knew she was actually waiting for someone. Meanwhile, we find our hero fishing by the town pond. Over the last decade, he had added 5 points to constitution and 5 to charm. His body was now as tough as a top-tier spiritual tool. At this point, even if he stood still and let a golden core expert attack him, it would likely only result in a minor scratch. Then, in the 95th year, he unexpectedly obtained something from a wandering martial artist. It was a fragmented map showing the location of a teleportation array leading to the spirit realm. He took one look at it and casually tucked it into a book to use as a table wedge. Go to the spirit realm? He thought that was a ridiculous idea. He had heard that in that place, golden core masters are as common as dogs. Here, he was an invincible ancestor. There, he'd be a nobody. In the spirit realm, he would be nothing more than an ant that could be crushed at any moment. Why on earth would he go there? He didn't realize, of course, that his physical body alone was already strong enough to crush a nascent soul cultivator. By the 100th year, the elders of Gantang town had passed away wave after wave. He had become the oldest resident in town, and yet, his appearance remained frozen at 20. To avoid causing a scene, he used a disguise technique to give himself a mustache, pretending to be a middle-aged man. One day, a beautifully dressed woman arrived in town. With a single glance, he recognized her as the former empress, Lu Rian. 20 years had passed, and her face now bore the faint marks of time. She knew he hated trouble, so for 20 years, she never sought him out. But now, she had finally abdicated her throne. Leaving the imperial life behind, she came here alone. Sir, she asked softly, could Rian trouble you for a cup of tea? Come in, he replied. It's freshly brewed. She didn't mention how he had saved the country, and he didn't mention his past feats. Like two old friends who had known each other for years, they talked about the town's harvest and the neighbor's cat. In this moment, she was no longer a powerful empress, and he no longer had to pretend to be a mysterious master. At this very moment, they were just two stars briefly crossing paths in the mortal world. Afterward, Lu Rian settled down in the town. She bought a small courtyard next to his, spending her days tending to flowers and plants. Occasionally, she would drop by his place for a meal. She never asked about his cultivation, and he never brought up the old court affairs. The townspeople whispered that the old mayor's heart had finally blossomed and that he was going to spend his remaining years with her. He just smiled, neither explaining nor denying it. He knew all too well that a mortal's remaining years are far too short. By the 115th year, over these last 15 years, he had increased his strength attribute to 50 points. On a snowy winter day, the courtyard next door was unusually quiet. He pushed open the door and saw the silver-haired Lu Rian lying in a rocking chair, covered by a thick fur cloak. It was the same one she wore when they first met. Now looking a bit worn, she looked at him, and for a brief moment, a youthful spark of joy flickered in her fading eyes. Sir, I have shared this tea with you for 15 years, she whispered. Rian is truly content. Trembling, she pulled a warm jade pendant from her robe. This was the Great Qin imperial family's highest-level secret medicine. Back then, she hadn't just fought to protect the borders of the country. She did it because she knew he hated trouble. As long as Great Qin remained standing, those short-sighted fools wouldn't dare disturb the peace of Gantang town. But now, I must go. To have had the honor of spending my final years with you, sir. Rian is satisfied. Amidst the swirling snow, this legendary empress passed away with a smile. He stood in the snow for a long time, eventually pouring a cup of hot tea at her grave. In your next life, don't be born into a royal family, and don't meet an immortal. Just find someone to love and spend your life with them. In the 120th year, he once again felt a strange palpitation. It wasn't fear, but a sense that the world itself was starting to reject him. His power was too great, so great that every breath he took disturbed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. He had to restrain his aura even more carefully, spending his days staring blankly at that old desk. Until this day, when the sky cracked, it literally split open. The heavens above Gantang town looked like a shattered mirror, revealing a massive black vortex. Even worse, he felt the very will of the world pushing him out. The map could no longer contain a character with maxed out stats. From the sky, beams of shadow-cutting light descended. It was the light of forced ascension. Whether he liked it or not, the world was kicking him out. It seems it's time to find a new place to keep a low profile, he sighed softly. He looked back at Gantang town one last time. It held 120 years of memories. He went inside, and from the desk From the corner of the desk, he pulled out that tattered map and the jade pendant Rian had left behind, finally picking up his small bundle of belongings. He called out to the empty void, telling it to stop rushing him because he would leave on his own. Then, he took a single step into the air. Following the light of ascension, he threw himself toward that massive crack in the sky. At the very moment he was about to leave this world, he turned back toward Gantang Town and flicked his finger, sending a soft golden light to envelop the entire village. It was a parting gift, really. He used 5 points of his luck to forge a karmic shield that would protect them for 100 years, ensuring peace and good harvests. He considered this his final payment for the rent he owed the world. With a sudden flash of light, his figure vanished completely into the silence. Below, the people of Gantang Town knelt and bowed, their faces covered in tears. On the stone monument at the town entrance, a new line of text appeared. An immortal dwelt here. The bright moon knows no age. The scenery before his eyes shifted constantly. When he finally opened them again, the spiritual energy was so thick it nearly took his breath away. This was the spirit realm, a holy land for cultivators, but also a brutal battlefield where the strong preyed on the weak. We see him standing on a massive ascension platform, surrounded by cultivators wearing various robes, all staring at him as if he were a curiosity. He stood there, perfectly still, right in the center of that enormous and ancient stone platform. What a joke, one of them sneered. A mere mortal body that hasn't even reached the chi refining stage? There are better ways to seek death than this, another laughed. They assumed he had offended some powerful sect in the lower realm. They figured he was just some unlucky soul forcibly ejected by an envoy. To them, he was nothing more than a pathetic loser. He ignored their mockery entirely. Instead, he reached into his bundle, pulled out a gold ingot, and handed it to the fat cultivator, laughing the loudest. "Brother, could you point me in the right direction?" he asked calmly. The fat cultivator's laughter died in an instant. The cultivator looked at the mortal gold with a disdainful curl of his lip, yet he still casually pointed toward the north. 30,000 miles that way, where the energy is heaviest and black clouds press down, that is the place. But I advise you not to go. He warned that the Chi-Yu sect was famous for refining souls from living people. With your smooth skin and tender flesh, you probably won't even leave a whole corpse behind. Our protagonist nodded seriously at this grim prospect. He cupped his hands in thanks. "Much obliged for the warning, brother. I am a man who listens to good advice. I'll come right back once my business is done," he added. Then, he turned north and slightly bent his knees. In the next heartbeat, the ascension platform, forged from 10,000-year profound ice and supposedly immovable even by great deities, suddenly shattered beneath his feet. The terrifying counterforce kicked up a gale-force wind that sent everyone flying. By the time they crawled up, covered in dust, he was long gone. All that remained were massive cracks stretching hundreds of feet across the stone and a vacuum trail in the sky where his body had literally torn through the air. The silence was absolute. The fat cultivator swallowed hard, looking at the gold ingot in his hand while his legs shook uncontrollably. What kind of physical monster was that? For a nascent soul cultivator in this realm, 30,000 miles would require several days of flight. But for him, it was merely a matter of a few well-placed jumps. 3 hours later, we reached the Tsangin Mountains. Here, a black mist lingers year-round, and the air feels heavy with death. Inside the main hall of the Chi-Yu sect, the current sect leader, Ancestor Xueming, was in the middle of a towering rage. "Useless. You are all useless. It has been 80 years. Have you still not found that cursed town mayor from the lower realm?" Back then, he shattered the ninth elder's soul-bound treasure and physical body with a single punch. He destroyed our sect's influence in the lower world. If this debt isn't repaid, where is the honor of our Chi-Yu sect? The elders kneeling below trembled in fear. Finally, the great elder gathered his courage to speak. "Sect leader, please calm your anger. The suppression of the heavenly Tao is too harsh. Once the disciples we send down reach, if we exceed the power limits, we'll be struck down by the heavenly lightning. We simply cannot find any trace of that man." Ancestor Xueming's eyes flickered with a sinister fire, but just as he was about to erupt, a blinding streak of azure light descended. With world-shattering force, it slammed directly into the white jade plaza of the main hall, causing the entire Tsangin mountain range to shudder. Countless palaces and pavilions collapsed instantly in the shockwave, and screams echoed everywhere. Ancestor Xueming was utterly shocked. He immediately led the elders rushing out of the hall, only to find a massive crater had been carved into the center of the plaza. Amidst the swirling dust stood a young man wearing an old bamboo hat and a long robe that had been washed until it was white. He was unhurriedly brushing the dust off his clothes. Ancestor Xueming swept his divine sense over him, and his heart skipped a beat. There wasn't a single ripple of spiritual energy coming from him. How could a mere mortal possibly survive that impact? "Who exactly are you, and why have you come to destroy the gates of our Chi-Yu sect?" Our protagonist simply straightened his hat. He lifted his head, his calm gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I am the town mayor of Gantang Town," he replied simply. The entire area fell into a deathly silence at those words. Ancestor Xueming's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. "It's you, that reckless physical cultivator from the lower realm." Our hero nodded. "I heard you've been looking for me for 80 years. I'm the type of person who hates trouble, and I don't particularly like being on someone's hit list. So, since it's my first day after ascending, I thought I'd stop by and solve the problem personally." Ancestor Shiweming laughed in pure rage. A thick, killing intent erupted from his eyes. "There is a path to heaven, yet you refuse it. Hell has no gate, yet you barge in. In the lower realm, I couldn't touch you. But here in the spirit realm, I am a mighty deity transformation stage expert. Elders, heed my command. Activate the 10,000 ghost soul-devouring array. We shall grind his bones to dust. We will refine his soul to light our lamps." Before his voice even faded, dozens of nascent soul elders began forming hand seals. The sky turned black as billions of vengeful ghosts blotted out the sun, lunging toward him. Faced with the power of an entire sect, he didn't even show the slightest intention of dodging. He simply took a very deep breath. Then, he slowly raised his right hand and clenched it into a fist. With 50 points of strength and 11 points of charm, he prepared to strike. He threw a single punch. There was no flash of spiritual energy, no ripple of mystical laws, only a force that was pure to the absolute extreme. It was the very essence of power. A violent explosion erupted as a visible white shockwave surged forward from the center of his strike, sweeping across everything in its path. The 10,000 ghost array shattered instantly, and the billions of vengeful spirits were shaken into nothingness. As for those nascent soul elders, they didn't even have time to scream before their bodies were turned into a mist of blood by the violent wind of that single punch. The shockwave continued unabated, heading straight for Ancestor Shiweming. When the wind finally died down, the main peak of the Chi-Yu sect had vanished. In its place was a massive, bottomless canyon stretching for hundreds of miles. Our protagonist simply turned around and began walking back down the mountain. From his ascension to the destruction of a sect, only an hour had passed. Now, his karma with the lower realm was completely severed. No one would be coming to bother him anymore. He rubbed his chin, already beginning to plan out his new life in this world. The spiritual energy in the spirit realm was so dense that he figured his turtle breath technique should be twice as effective here. His plan was simple: find a quiet mortal town with beautiful scenery and stay hidden for another 10,000 years. By the time he added 10,000 points to every single attribute, he smiled slightly and lowered the brim of his bamboo hat. By then, he told himself, he might actually be truly invincible. Meanwhile, the chaos at the Ascension platform settled within half a day. News of the event spread through the nearby 17 cities, while the news of the Chi-Yu sect's destruction spread like a plague 3 days later. It swept through the entire northern region of the spirit realm, yet no one connected these two events together. After all, who would believe it? No one could imagine a mortal who had just ascended from the lower realm could wipe out a 3,000-year-old demonic sect in a single hour. He was quite satisfied with this. Being ignored was, to him, the best possible outcome. After leaving the Tsangyin Mountains, he intentionally slowed his pace. This was the spirit realm, not the lower world. In the lower world, he could walk tall, but here, he decided it was best to keep a low profile. He traveled south, specifically choosing paths through mortal settlements. 7 days later, he arrived at a place known as. We see him stop at a small place called Fengqiao Town. It was nestled against mountains and water, with thin spiritual energy and far from any major sects. The town was mostly filled with hunters, herb farmers, and traveling merchants. Most importantly, the town was small enough to be quiet. Fewer people meant fewer troubles. He spent 2 silver taels to buy an old house with a courtyard, then hung Lu Rian's jade pendant by his bed. As for that mysterious map fragment, he used it to level his table leg again. He realized that no matter where he went, that thing was perfect for stabilizing furniture. During his first year after ascending, he didn't add to his strength. Instead, he gave himself a single point of mana. In the next moment, his slowly circulating turtle breath technique felt as if it had been suddenly ignited. To be honest, it was quite a shock. The spiritual energy of the spirit realm was far denser than the world below. For the first time, he clearly felt a strand of true spiritual origin forming within him. That strand of origin was weak, so weak that even a basic chi refining cultivator might look down on it. But to him, it was different. It held extraordinary meaning because it meant he was finally no longer just a village chief who only knew how to swing his fists. He was now a village chief who could swing his fists and use magic. In the second year, he added another point of mana. Nourished by the spirit realm's energy, the turtle breath technique transformed again. It was no longer simple breath control, but a new cultivation method entirely. He named it the Black Tortoise Longevity Scripture. The name was quite imposing, and its effects were equally impressive. It could efficiently convert source energy into cultivation while compressing his blood, mana, and divine sense. Simply put, it was perfect for staying hidden. In the third year, he attempted to spread out his divine sense to see what he could find. As his awareness expanded across the town, he saw the old town magistrate in the back office of the yamen. The old man was clutching an account book and sighing in despair. He silently withdrew his divine sense, knowing that knowing too much is its own kind of trouble. Unfortunately, trouble is not the sort of thing that stays away just because you find it annoying. Half a month later, it arrived. A third-rank wolf demon appeared outside Fengqiao Town. The old magistrate and a dozen constables stood at the gate, their legs visibly shaking. He stood at the back of the crowd, originally intending not to interfere, but the wolf demon just happened to choose his courtyard wall for its first bite. After the beast had chewed on his wall for a while, he remained silent for 2 breaths before stepping forward and exploding its head with a single punch. The entire town was stunned, and the old magistrate even knelt before him on the spot. He quickly helped the man up, earnestly explaining that he was just a passing stranger. But the next morning, the townspeople spontaneously gathered at his door, carrying a large plaque. To be honest, he should have seen this coming. On the plaque were 5 words written in gold: "Please be our town magistrate." He stood at the door, staring at a sign that was far too familiar for comfort. He fell into a deep silence. He had ascended to the spirit realm specifically to find a new place to lay low, yet after all that effort, he was back to being a local official. He declined 3 times, and the townspeople knelt for 3 days. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he accepted the position. And who could blame him, really? Managing a town was something he had plenty of experience with, after all. And so, his first official identity in the spirit realm was established. He became the new magistrate of Fengxiao Town. When the news spread, the neighboring towns were shocked, because as we know, word travels fast. No one had ever seen a magistrate who could kill a 3rd-rank wolf demon with a single strike. Soon, Fengxiao Town became famous, and fame brought new troubles. Strange individuals began arriving one after another. There was a dejected youth carrying a giant sword, looking as though he had lost everything. There was a young woman fleeing from enemies with a blood feud on her shoulders, and a young man in black with a shattered dantian shouting about destiny. Looking at those familiar protagonist faces, his eyelid began to twitch. He knew exactly what kind of chaos followed people like them. He immediately erected a new sign at the town entrance. It bore a single sentence: "This town does not take disciples, form alliances, or get involved in drama." The sign also forbade broken engagements and face-slapping. The crowd looked on in confusion, but he knew just how vital these rules were for a quiet life. Unfortunately, rules rarely have any binding power over those with protagonist energy. In his 5th year, a woman in white arrived at Fengxiao Town. As she entered, snow began to fall from the sky, and every pedestrian turned to stare. She was simply too beautiful and far too cold. She was followed by 8 incredibly powerful guardians. The martial artist in town recognized her identity instantly. She was Shu Qingran, the saintess of the Xianxiao sect. He was in his courtyard chopping wood when he heard the name. For the first time, the axe in his hand faltered and snapped. Soon after, there was a gentle knock at his gate. A voice that felt both familiar and distant drifted in from outside. The voice asked, "Sir, may Qingran come in for a cup of tea?" He stood there in the silence of his courtyard for a very long time. In the end, he walked over and opened the courtyard gate. Outside stood Shu Qingran, her beauty unchanged, though her eyes held a depth far greater than before. She looked at him, her eyes reddening slightly as she whispered that she had been searching for him for over 100 years. He looked at her, then glanced at the 8 guardians standing behind her. If she was coming to visit, he wondered why she felt the need to bring so many people along. Qingran replied softly that it wasn't her choice. They simply had to follow. He frowned, knowing immediately that a sentence like that meant trouble was following close behind. Still, he welcomed her into the courtyard. The 8 guardians tried to follow her inside, but with a single look from him, the gate slammed shut on its own with a heavy thud. The expressions of all 8 men changed instantly. They realized, with a chill, that they didn't even have the courage to push the door open. Inside, Qingran sat at the stone table, quietly watching him brew tea. She didn't ask how his years had been, and he didn't ask about hers. They both knew that the journey from the mortal realm to the spirit realm could not have been an easy one. To be honest, words weren't needed. Once the tea was ready, Qingran held the cup and remarked softly that he was still just as wonderful as she remembered. He noted that while he used to fear trouble in the mortal realm, it seemed the troubles of the spirit realm were now finding him too. Qingran couldn't help but laugh. For a moment, she looked exactly like the shy 10-year-old girl who had once grabbed his sleeve and cried. But the smile lasted only a moment before it was replaced once again by a deep, lingering exhaustion. She told him she had thought of him often, and that she had come this time specifically to ask for his help. Something had gone wrong within the Xianxiao sect. The ancestor who had originally taken her away had passed away 30 years ago. The new sect master had conspired with the Destiny Pavilion of the Central Continent, intending to use her very soul and aura. They wanted her to open an ancient tomb, threatening that if she refused, everyone in the Xianxiao sect would be killed. He remained silent for a moment. Finally, he let out a long sigh. He had always known that anything involving a protagonist template never ended well. When she asked if he regretted opening the door for her, he gave her a look that was both weary and kind. He felt a little something, but not much, though he admitted he might think of her occasionally. And so, the quiet moment between them was interrupted by a presence that felt far from divine. A voice called out, asking him to relate to their cause, though it carried a tone of forced politeness. He looked on with a weary, kind gaze, but he didn't believe a word of this feigned benevolence or the hidden anger beneath it. We see that outside the gates, the tension had been building for quite some time. The air grew heavy as the surrounding energy began to fluctuate, drawn in by the visitors. It seemed the world outside wasn't content to let them share a simple cup of tea in peace. A middle-aged man in black robes appeared. He didn't attack immediately, being far more cautious than the elders of the Xianqiao sect. Standing 3 miles away, he cupped his hands in a respectful gesture, identifying himself as Zhou Fei of the Destiny Pavilion. He claimed he was there to invite this sinless Taoist for a chat, asking if he knew that Xu Qingran carried a heavenly mandate. This contract was the key to opening an ancient tomb, a destiny that apparently belonged solely to her. He warned that since the contract wasn't his, he shouldn't make an enemy of the Destiny Pavilion. To be honest, it was a tired threat. He replied that he hadn't intended to interfere, but since they insisted on bringing their threats to his front door, then yes, they were enemies now. A heavy silence fell outside as Zhou Fei realized his intimidation had failed utterly. After a long pause, Zhou Fei laughed, calling him arrogant and reminding him that the Destiny Pavilion had stood for 70,000 years. He boasted that they had more than 10 masters of the body integration stage, suggesting that no matter his skill, he couldn't possibly fight against fate itself. Hearing this, he simply looked up at the sky with a faint smile. He remarked that back in the mortal realm, people used to tell him almost the exact same thing. And later, as it turned out, those people all ended up dead. Zhou Fei's smile vanished instantly as he reached into his sleeve. 3 ancient bronze life pincers flew out, expanding into a massive formation map that covered the entire area with glowing destiny runes. This was the famous technique of the Destiny Pavilion, designed to strip a man of his luck and alter his very fate. The sky suddenly darkened, and the townspeople felt a strange trance-like state, as if their very souls were being pulled away. Xu Qingran stood up, walking to his side and whispering a warning to be careful, as this was the true power of destiny at work. He nodded calmly, and then reached out, grabbing a thread of fate hanging in midair. Zhou Fei's pupils contracted in shock because that thread should have been formless and intangible, only movable by divine thought. Yet here he was, pulling it from the void like a common rope. So, this is what fate looks like, he mused. After a brief glance, he decided it felt a bit fragile and applied a bit of pressure. The entire formation map shattered on the spot. Zhou Fei was struck as if by lightning, coughing up a large amount of blood in pure disbelief. He stammered, asking how it was possible to touch the sword of destiny with bare hands. He simply brushed his fingers off, finding the sensation rather interesting. So, this was how one used aura and the threads of fate. Zhou Fei, meanwhile, felt a chill run through his entire body. He realized that he wasn't just resisting the technique, he was dissecting it. For someone to snap a thread of fate upon their first encounter with destiny arts, well, Monster didn't quite cover it. This was something else entirely. Terrified, Zhou Fei didn't dare stay a moment longer, turning to flee using an escape technique. He remained seated, not even bothering to stand, and simply flicked his finger. An invisible force shot across 3 miles of open air, reaching Zhou Fei, his soul, and his destiny plate. Everything exploded in midair, leaving behind nothing but a faint stain that quickly vanished into the wind. And that was that. After that day, Fengqiao town became utterly silent. No one dared to approach, and even the birds in the sky went out of their way to fly around it. He finally enjoyed a bit of long-awaited peace, though he knew it wouldn't last. Before his death, Zhou Fei had already sent word back to the central state. Sure enough, half a month later, 3 grandmasters of the Destiny Pavilion opened an altar to calculate his origins. They sought to measure his fate and the karma between him and Xu Qingran. But the first grandmaster saw only a vast blankness before his eyes bled out. The second grandmaster didn't even have time to utter the words beyond this realm before his body collapsed into a pile of shattered bone. The third fared the worst. He forced a divination of Gontang town and saw a stone tablet. On that tablet were 5 simple words. Here dwells an immortal. Immediately after, he lost his mind. The Destiny Pavilion fell into a state of absolute uproar, and the Pavilion Master knew why. The Pavilion Master personally issued an order. This person was not to be calculated, provoked, or approached. Anyone who disobeyed would be expelled from the Destiny Pavilion. It seems these people were finally smart enough to let the matter rest. We see Xu Qingran sitting across from him, watching as he slowly refills the teapot. He glances at the setting sun outside. He decides to stay for a few more years to build his attribute points. He'll feel much safer when he's truly untouchable. Xu Qingran asks about her own place, and he looks up, telling her she can stay if she likes, but he isn't taking disciples. He won't accept a holy maiden either. She blinks, wondering what role is left, and he takes a moment to think. He supposes taking in someone to share his meals wouldn't be so bad. Xu Qingran pauses, then lets out a soft laugh. It was the most relaxed she had smiled since arriving in the spirit realm. Soon, new rumors began to swirl around Fengqiao town. People whispered that the lady in white had a terrifying background, yet before the town head, she acted like a quiet, obedient little wife. They praised his capabilities, and when he hears this, he simply continues setting out the tea and snacks. He considers explaining, but then decides he's too lazy to bother. After all, mortal gossip is impossible to silence anyway. Better they guess he's a late bloomer than an ancient body cultivator. The former sounds much less intimidating, to be honest. By his 10th year in the spirit realm, his strength reached 55, constitution hit 25, and mana rose to 5 points. His divine sense could now cover 10,000 miles, and his physical body had reached a level even he couldn't quite define. One night, while practicing in the courtyard, he casually throws a punch toward the sky. Consequently, 10,000 miles away, a passing minor star is shattered by the air pressure alone. Watching the distant burst of fire, he falls into a brief silence. He worries that he might be becoming a bit too powerful again, which, in his world, is a very real concern. Shu Qingran stands under the corridor, telling him quietly that his words sound a little bit arrogant. He considers this seriously. He agrees to try and say such things less often in the future, but his peace was destined to be short-lived. Before he can settle back into his routine, massive news spreads from the central state. The ancient earth curtain has appeared. It had appeared ahead of schedule, and as it turns out, one of the keys to opening its wooden gates was the destiny charm Shu Qingran carried. Simultaneously, the four great powers, the Destiny Pavilion, the Great Desolation Holy Land, Wanyao Mountain, and the Infinite Sword Sect, all issued a joint summons. Anyone providing the whereabouts of Shu Qingran and Wu Sui would be rewarded with a top-tier sword. Those who captured them would be granted an entire province. The entire spirit realm began to move. We see him staring at the bounty notice posted at the town entrance, remaining silent for a very long time. He eventually turns back towards Shu Qingran and remarks that, as he expected, getting involved with her was bound to be a lifetime of trouble. Shu Qingran purses her lips and asks what they should do now. He simply reaches down, tears the bounty notice off the wall, and crumples it up. He tosses it into a fire pit, the flames reflecting off his bamboo hat and his face, which remained, to be honest, a bit too calm. He asks rhetorically that since they want to find him so badly, why make them search? He slowly stands up and brushes the dust from his sleeves. He tells her it's time to go. As he steps forward, the ground instantly explodes into a deep crater, and Shu Qingran feels her vision blur. The surrounding scenery begins to recede at a frantic pace. The central state is vast, so large that a normal cultivator might never cross it in a lifetime. For him, however, it was just a matter of a few jumps. Half an hour later, he and Shu Qingran are standing outside the Destiny Pavilion's gates. Here, the mountains are arranged like a chessboard under hanging star trails, with 99 observation platforms suspended high above the sea of clouds. It truly possessed the atmosphere of an immortal sect. The gates were already open, no formations, no ambushes, and no killing intent to be found. Only a single white-haired old man stood alone before the entrance, waiting for them. Shu Qingran whispers that this is the pavilion master, Lin's son. He looks at the old man and decides he is far more pleasant than Zhou Fei. At least he didn't start the conversation with a lecture. Lin's son bows deeply toward him, showing a level of respect that was quite rare for a man of his standing. He asks the old man why he didn't run, since he had clearly predicted his arrival. Lin's son can only offer a bitter, helpless smile. He explains that after filling a whole page with divinations, he realized one thing. No matter how fast he ran, he could never outrun his guest's fist. He gets straight to the point, asking who proposed the bounty. Lin's son remains silent for a moment before deciding to speak the truth. The Great Desolation Holy Land proposed it. Wanyao Mountain agreed. The Infinite Sword Sect nodded, and the Destiny Pavilion was simply forced to comply. They participated because everyone assumed Lady Shu was the key to the opening, but in reality, Lin's son looks up at him now. His gaze is incredibly complex as he explains that while Lady Shu is indeed one of the keys, she wasn't what caused the tomb to appear early. It was him. Shu Qingran's expression shifts slightly at this, though he doesn't seem surprised at all, and simply tells the old man to continue. Lin's son takes a deep breath, revealing that what lies buried in that ancient tomb isn't actually land, but rather an immortal who fell from beyond this realm. Legend says this immortal's death polluted the entire hidden sea before the spirit realm's ancestors joined forces. They suppressed it, and the tomb was built over it to seize its fortune. Now the seal is loosening, but the old man fears they won't find fortune. They will find trouble. Hearing the word trouble, he suddenly becomes much more serious and asks exactly when the seal will break. At midnight tonight, at the Guishu Gate in the Hidden Sea. He nods, but Lin's son hesitates for a moment before speaking again. He warns Wu Sui that many will be there tonight. The Great Desolation Holy Lord, the Wanyao Mountain Lord, and the Infinite Sect Master. Even several old monsters who have been in seclusion for years will appear. They might not be his match, but that gate, well, they likely have no idea what is actually behind it. He simply dismisses the concern, noting that he isn't afraid of people. He intends to take what he needs. After leaving the Destiny Pavilion, we see that they don't linger, heading straight for the Hidden Sea in the central state. It lies at the easternmost edge where the sky meets the pitch-black water. By the time they arrive, night has just begun to fall. The sea is as deathly silent as a massive coffin. In the center of the water floats an ancient black gate, 10,000 feet high. The gate is covered in ancient runes that no one can read anymore. The four great powers have already arrived. To the east is the Destiny Pavilion. They stand far back, clearly signaling that they are only there to watch the show. To the west is the Great Desolation Holy Land, radiating holy light. To the south, the Infinite Sword Sect's sword intent fills the air, carving hundreds of cracks into the very surface of the sea. To To the north, the great demons of Wanyao Mountain occupy the sky. Countless rogue cultivators and hidden old monsters wait in the shadows. Everyone is waiting for midnight. As soon as he and Shu Qingran appear, the entire sea suddenly falls into a heavy, expectant silence. Every gaze lands directly on him. Wu Sui has arrived, and to be honest, they seem shocked he actually dared to show up. The monster who ascended from below has arrived, and they want to see just how long his arrogance can last. The sea breeze is cold, but he only looks down. He watches the churning black water beneath his feet. Shu Qingran whispers that the feng shui of this place is terrible, and honestly, she isn't wrong. She asks if he is referring to the people gathered here, but he simply shakes his head. He clarifies that he is talking about the thing behind the gate. Just then, a golden light rises from the Great Desolation Holy Land camp. A middle-aged man in golden robes steps into the air, his aura as overwhelming as the midday sun. This is Ji Buchang of the Great Desolation Holy Land. He demands that Wu Sui hand over Shu Qingran, promising that if he does, they can pretend nothing happened. Wu Sui looks up at him, while the entire area falls into a deathly silence. He calmly asks the man exactly what kind of thing he thinks he is. Ji Buchang's veins bulge with rage. He screams Wu Sui's name, his patience clearly having reached its absolute limit. He asks if Wu Sui truly intends to make an enemy of the entire world. Wu Sui thinks about it quite seriously for a moment before answering. He explains that he originally wanted to have a chat with them, but their tone of voice has made him lose interest in talking altogether. Ji Buchang laughs in a fit of rage, declaring that he will personally teach this ascender a lesson today. He wants to see just how much skill this newcomer actually possesses. With a wave of his hand, a massive, ancient cauldron emerges from the void. As the cauldron rises, the spiritual energy for 10,000 miles collapses, and the sea level itself is pressed down by dozens of feet. Someone cries out in shock, recognizing it as the Yellow Heaven Cauldron, the sacred treasure of the Great Desolation Holy Land. The cauldron falls with a thunderous roar, making it feel as if the sky itself is collapsing. Wu Sui stands his ground, neither dodging nor retreating. He simply raises his right hand and catches the massive cauldron with one palm. The sea explodes in 1,000-foot waves, yet his feet don't sink an inch. The spectators are left speechless, and Ji Buchang's face pales in disbelief. This should be impossible, yet here we are. Wu Sui flicks the side of the cauldron and nods, noting that it is indeed quite sturdy. A moment later, he closes his fingers slightly. The Yellow Heaven Cauldron emits a piercing wail as cracks begin to spread rapidly across its surface. Ji Buchang coughs up a mouthful of blood, screaming in absolute horror for him to stop. But as we know, it's already far too late for that. Unfortunately, it is already far too late, and a sharp cracking sound echoes across the water. Wu Sui casually picks up the largest fragment of the cauldron's rim and tucks it into his bag. He remarks that he'll keep it to boil water later, a practical choice, though the crowd is far too stunned to appreciate the humor. Suddenly, the sharp ring of a blade erupts from the boundless sword sect as an old man in gray robes arrives upon 10,000 swords. This is Xie Ding, and he is livid, declaring that he will not allow the boundless sword sect to be insulted before demanding Wu Sui's life. Wu Sui watches the overwhelming sea of blades and frowns, wondering why every sword cultivator he meets has such a terrible attitude. Xie Ding doesn't bother with words. He presses his hand down, sending 100,000 flying swords falling like a torrential rain. Standing his ground, Wu Sui slowly extends 2 fingers and makes a gentle pinching motion toward the center of the storm. The 100,000 swords hit an invisible wall and stop midair, only for Wu Sui to clench his fist, forcing the entire formation to collapse. The blades are crushed into a massive ball of scrap metal, leaving Xie Ding to stare in horror as his life's work is ruined. With a flick of his finger, Wu Sui sends the iron sphere flying back like a meteor toward the sect's ranks. Xie Ding and 36 sword cultivators behind him are instantly reduced to a gray mist, leaving the entire camp in a deathly silence. Just then, the ancient black gate in the center of the sea begins to glow, and a pale Shu Qingran whispers that something is watching them. She is right, of course. Wu Sui can feel that gaze too. Suddenly, the gate trembles as a massive black chain snaps from within. The atmosphere shifts instantly, and the faces of everyone present turn pale with a new kind of dread. Lin Sun cries out from the distance, realizing that the gate isn't simply opening. Something from the other side is forcing its way out. A single, deathly pale hand slowly reaches out from behind the gate. It looks ordinary, almost small, but the feeling it carries is anything but. The moment it appears, the spiritual energy for 100,000 miles simply dies. It stops flowing, stops breathing, and stops responding. An old master screams in pure terror, recognizing the presence of an immortal master, a being from a realm they can barely comprehend. In the next heartbeat, that pale hand presses down lightly, and the old master along with hundreds of people around him simply vanish. The cultivators are instantly reduced to silent ash, and the arrogant leaders who once stood tall are now plunged into total chaos. They retreat like madmen, some using blood shields, others burning their very lifespans, and some even kneeling to beg for their lives. But it is all in vain. Something is slowly emerging from the ancient gate, a figure in white, bound head to toe in heavy chains. The figure has no eyes, only a smooth and terrifyingly pale face. Yet the moment he looks up, everyone feels utterly exposed. It is as if they are being watched by something truly ancient. To be honest, Wu Sui finds this quite troublesome. The immortal master slowly raises a hand and points toward our protagonist. In that instant, an unprecedented sense of danger arrives. For the first time, Wu Sui feels a genuine threat. The very space beneath his feet begins to collapse and crumble. His blood begins to flow backward, and even the black tortoise longevity scripture within him roars with an unfamiliar, violent intensity. He looks down at his arm and notices a tiny, thin cut has appeared, a sight he hasn't seen in a very long time. He muses that in all his time in the spirit realm, this is the first being capable of actually breaking his skin. The immortal master offers no reply. He simply takes a single step forward, causing the ground beneath to instantly evaporate into nothingness. Steam rises from the sea as countless cultivators vanish into a blinding white light before they can even utter a scream. As the figure fully emerges, the world itself begins to crack, and a massive black rift opens in the sky above. It looks as though the entire spirit realm might be torn apart. Wu Sui looks up at the rift, his brow finally furrowing. He realizes that if this continues, he won't just lose his quiet life, he won't have a village left to lead. With a heavy sigh, he reflects on how he only left home to reason with people, not to save the world. Somehow, he has ended up cleaning up another mess. Shu Qingren looks at him and softly suggests that he should flee. She tells him to save himself if he cannot win. Wu Sui glances back, dismissing such nonsense with a simple look. He reminds her that his home is in Fengqi town, and he still has a map waiting for him on his desk. Then, he takes a step forward. In this moment, he stops holding back his power, his bloodline, and his true, ancient self. His physical body, which had grown so powerful it defied all logic, erupted with a roar as his true aura finally unfurled across the spirit realm. It stretched across 100,000 miles of mountains and seas, and the fleeing cultivators found themselves suddenly overwhelmed by this pure, absolute force. The sheer pressure of his life force forced them to their knees, while the chains on the immortal master flew up, transforming into 9 black dragons to strike. Wu Sui caught the first dragon and used it like a whip, throwing it back to shatter the second one instantly, which, to be honest, was quite a sight. He crushed the third dragon under his heel, and when the fourth coiled around his waist, he flexed his muscles and simply snapped it into pieces. The cultivators watching from a distance felt their skin crawl as they watched the chains disintegrate. It was a display of raw, terrifying power. They wondered what kind of monster they were actually witnessing. Realizing he couldn't win with brute force, the immortal master finally changed his tactics. He reached toward the sky, causing the rift to expand violently as countless ghostly shadows began to pour out from the depths of the void. It seemed they were trying to use this chance to descend upon the spirit realm. Lin's son watched in horror, realizing the master was opening a gate. He was trying to bring in the outer contamination. Hearing those words, Wu Sui paused for a brief moment as a memory surfaced. He remembered the half-spoken warning from the Destiny Pavilion before they were destroyed. They were trying to warn him about the outer realm all along. So, this was what they meant. Sensing Wu Sui's hesitation, the immortal master flickered and instantly appeared right in front of Shu Qingren. He reached for her forehead, and though her spiritual aura automatically erupted into white gold chains to protect her, it wasn't enough. Against a being of this level, her defenses were far too weak. Wu Sui's eyes turned cold as he realized the master had a death wish. In the next heartbeat, he vanished. No, he didn't actually disappear. He was simply moving at a speed that rendered human sight entirely useless. It was a movement so swift that the concept of vision no longer had any meaning for those watching the battle. When he reappeared, he was standing directly behind the immortal master, his right hand buried deep within the entity's chest. The world fell silent once again. The immortal master slowly looked down at the hand protruding from his torso, and we see what Wu Sui is holding. He was gripping a sphere as black as the night, not a heart of flesh, but a pulsing core of the dead. For the first time, his hand felt hot. It was the burning sensation of a higher power, yet he didn't hesitate for a second. With a cold look, he tightened his grip. With a cold snort, he crushed the black sphere, causing it to explode instantly. The immortal master shuddered, as if his very foundation had been ripped away. The brilliant light surrounding his body began to dissipate rapidly, yet he did not die immediately. Instead, a crack slowly opened across his featureless face. It looked like a mouth, and in the next moment, a voice so raspy it defied description echoed directly within Wu Sui's mind. The entity whispered that it was finally him, causing Wu Sui's pupils to contract in surprise. It seemed the master actually recognized him. The master clarified that he wasn't recognizing Wu Sui himself, but rather what he was, someone just like him. Then, he tried to say something more. His voice was intermittent as his body began to completely disintegrate. Wu Sui frowned, pressing him to explain what came next, but the master hesitated. The immortal master remained silent for a long moment before finally leaving behind only 3 words: "Do not ascend." As the last syllable fell, he dissolved entirely into a shower of grayish-white light that scattered across the sky. At that same moment, the gate he had forcibly torn open began to slowly close, and the world finally regained its natural color. Everyone who survived stared at Wu Sui in a daze. There was no cheering or joy, only a primal, instinctive sense of awe and terror. They had just witnessed a man who claimed to be a mere village chief with their own eyes. He had literally reached out and killed an immortal corpse with his bare hands. Wu Sui stood there for a long time, saying nothing, until Xu Qingran approached. She glanced at him cautiously, asking with genuine concern if he was all right. To be honest, she looked more shaken than he did. He looked down at the grayish-white traces remaining on his palm and admitted that something was indeed wrong. Gu Wanqing felt her heart tighten at his words. She asked if his injuries were severe, but he simply shook his head. It wasn't about a physical wound. It was something far more complicated than that. He realized the trouble had only grown larger. Xu Qingran was stunned that even now, this was what he was worried about. Just then, deep within the ancient gate that remained partially open, a faint and mysterious light suddenly flickered into existence. Wu Sui's expression shifted slightly as he realized there was still something left inside that void. Something important. Xu Qingran followed his gaze and asked if they should enter. He remained silent for a long time, weighing the risks of what lay ahead. Wu Sui didn't want to linger, but the dying words of that entity were impossible to ignore, especially that cryptic claim that they were the same. It echoed in his mind, someone just like him, a statement that, to be honest, raised more questions than it answered. And so, he gave a small nod, deciding he would take a quick look inside, and then leave immediately. As he stepped through the ancient gate, with Xu Qingran following closely behind, we see that the world beyond wasn't a tomb, but a ruined wasteland of grayish-white. There was no spiritual energy here, nor any trace of time's flow, only a solitary, crumbling stone palace standing in the center of the ruins. At the entrance of the palace stood a broken monument. It bore no spiritual script or ancient runes from this world's history. Instead, it was carved with characters Wu Sui knew all too well, simplified Chinese characters, a sight that, naturally, changed everything. He stood before the stone, truly stunned for the first time. Xu Qingran, unable to read the script, could only ask him in a soft whisper. She asked what was written there. Wu Sui stared at the broken monument and began to read it aloud, word by word. To the one who follows, if you can see this, it means I have already failed. Like you, I came from elsewhere. And like you, I relied on time to grow stronger. The upper realm is no paradise. It is a hunting ground. Ascension is merely a trap. It is the act of delivering a grown fish into a larger net. If you are reading this, I failed to tear that net apart. Do not be in a hurry to ascend. At least, not until you feel you can shatter the sky with a single punch. Inside the hall, I have left a certain legacy, a gift that can grant one person longevity, intended to leave a small spark of humanity for whoever comes after me. Wu Sui fell into a long silence. Xu Qingran stood by his side, careful not to disturb him. She couldn't read the text, but she understood his expression. It wasn't fear she saw, but the quiet clarity of someone who had finally found a signpost. Deep within the palace, a small bronze seal hung suspended. The moment he reached out and grasped it, he instantly understood its purpose. It was exactly as the message described. It couldn't grant someone his own infinite growth, but it could allow one person to share his vast, unending years. He instinctively glanced at Xu Qingran. Her ears turned slightly red under his gaze, yet she still asked softly what the inscription said. He thought for a moment before replying. He told her that, for the time being, they should simply stay where they were. Xu Qingran gave a small, resolute nod and told Wu Sui that if he wasn't leaving, then she wouldn't leave either. She answered so quickly it was as if the decision required no thought at all, causing Wu Sui to offer a rare smile. He had set out to resolve a problem, only to find another person like himself had left a light burning at the end of it. Before leaving the ancient gate, he glanced back at the grayish-white ruins one last time and threw a single, devastating punch. The entire sealed land and the gate itself shattered, sinking forever into the void, as he had no desire to see that entity return. Anything that might ruin his peaceful days was better off buried forever, and with that, they returned to the hidden sea. The experts from the four great powers were still kneeling there, not daring to lift their heads, as Wu Sui left them with one warning. He declared that if anyone ever targeted Xu Qingran or Windbridge Town again, he would personally pay their sect a visit. No one dared to respond, yet everyone knew those words carried more weight than any decree, and the Heavenly Fate Pavilion immediately withdrew its bounty. The Great Desolation Holy Land closed its doors for a century. The Boundless Sword sect banned Wu Sui's name, and Wanyao Mountain moved its gates. They fled 100,000 miles to the west overnight, while Wu Sui, for his part, couldn't have cared less about their panic. He simply brought Xu Qingran back to Windbridge Town, where the courtyard, the teapot, and the old map under the table remained. He knelt down, pulled the map out for a brief look, and then tucked it right back where it was. He decided it was best used as a stabilizer, making Xu Qingran laugh as they sat in the courtyard that night brewing tea. He placed the small bronze seal on the stone table and pushed it toward her, explaining it was a gift from the tomb. He told her it could grant a person a very long life, though the price was having to see his face every single day. Shu Qingran stared at the small seal, her eyes slowly turning red as the weight of his words finally sank in. After waiting over 100 years, she had finally heard him mention a future that included her, yet she didn't grab the seal immediately. Instead, she looked at him and asked with total sincerity if this meant he was finally taking her in for good. Wu Sui held his teacup in silence for a long time before finally saying yes, and only then did Shu Qingran smile and take the seal. The moonlight fell softly, making her eyes sparkle as if they held the stars themselves. That night, Windbridge Town saw no lightning and heard no strange omens. There was only the old lamp in the courtyard, burning steadily until dawn. Many years later, people in the borderlands would still speak of that night at the Hidden Sea. They would tell tales of Wu Sui, the one who crushed a sacred artifact with a single fist and ended a grandmaster with his bare hands. Some claimed he had long since ascended to a higher realm, while others whispered he was a hidden hermit in some sacred land, or perhaps an ancient powerhouse reborn. Yet, no one would ever imagine that the man who made the entire world hold its breath was currently crouching in a kitchen in Windbridge Town. He was busy studying how to use the handle of the Yellow Heaven cauldron to boil water faster, while in the courtyard, Shu Qingran quietly dried her herbs. Children chased each other at the end of the street, and the inscriptions on the town's stone monument had begun to fade with time. It was a scene of perfect, ordinary life. He looked at the smoke rising from the chimneys and felt that this was enough. He would deal with the great web in the sky eventually, but not today. Today, he was simply a town mayor who had to settle neighborly disputes and find out whose chicken had wandered into whose yard. And honestly, he didn't mind at all.